Hey everyone, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about The Funhouse, the collector's edition on DVD. The Funhouse was made in 1981 and it was directed by Tobe Hooper. And Tobe Hooper had made a name for himself when he directed the 1974 horror classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And that particular movie has rightfully gone down as one of the scariest films ever made, and it's something that still holds up to this day. It combined a sort of gritty, grounded in reality documentary-style feel, with a biting social commentary on American culture at that point in time. And so, following that classic up, Tobe Hooper next did the 1976 horror film Eaten Alive, and while Eaten Alive had moments that harken back to Texas Chainsaw's atmosphere and commentary, enough so to where you could at least see what they were going for, I honestly didn't think that Eaten Alive was that good of a movie and found it to be mediocre at best. But Eaten Alive does have its fans though, so going from there, Tobe Hooper next did the 1979 television miniseries Salem's Lot. And Salem's Lot was an adaptation of the Stephen King novel of the same name, and the miniseries proved to be a double victory for both director Tobe Hooper and author Stephen King, because since this was a network television miniseries, a lot of people tuned in to watch it. And we're talking, people who didn't necessarily consider themselves, fans of the horror genre, but nonetheless, they tuned in and are like, hey, this is pretty good. And so Salem's Lot brought both Tobe Hooper and Stephen King a lot of mainstream credibility and respect. And one of the things that probably helped in that regard was the fact that there was a top-notch cast, including people like David Soul, Lou Ayres, Bonnie Bedelia, and James Mason. And so with all that being said, Salem's Lot was something that showed that Tobe Hooper could work within the confines of the horror genre and yet make a mainstream friendly work. And to this day, Salem's Lot is regarded as one of Tobe Hooper's best works as a director and one of the best adaptations of a Stephen King work. And so fast forwarding to 1981, Universal Studios was wanting to, make a slasher movie because they saw the success of Friday the 13th over at Paramount, and they saw how much money that film made, and they're like, hey, we need to keep up with these guys. And so they got a screenplay from a writer named Larry Block, and they approached Tobe Hooper about being the director for what would end up being the movie The Funhouse. And so Tobe Hooper, looked at the screenplay and he liked it. And one of the things that appealed to him about it was the fact that the majority of the film was set at a carnival. And one of the films that inspired Tobe Hooper was a noir film from back in the day called Nightmare Alley. And I haven't actually seen that one, but I've heard it's a classic, and the majority of it takes place at a carnival. And so, having seen that particular movie, Tobe Hooper had always wanted to do a horror film set at a carnival, and here he was being given the opportunity. So once Tobe Hooper was on board, the film got the green light, I should say. And so the movie had a budget of a little over $2 million, I believe, and it wasn't a massive financial blockbuster by any means. Like, it only made somewhere between $7 and $8 million, but it did make back its money at least, though. But most importantly, a lot of mainstream critics liked the film. People like Gene Siskel from Siskel and Ebert enjoyed it. And so with The Funhouse, much like his work on Salem's Lot, Tobe Hooper proved that he could work within the confines of the horror genre and yet turn out a mainstream friendly film. And so The Funhouse is regarded as one of Tobe Hooper's best works in a lot of circles, especially a part in those of the horror crowd. And while The Funhouse isn't a masterpiece like, say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, it's definitely a good little horror movie. And I would even say that if you're someone who's wanting to get into the horror genre but not wanting to be overtly traumatized by a ton of blood and gore, I mean, The Funhouse, while it is scary at times, it's not, say, traumatizingly gruesome. So I would say that this would probably be a one of several introductory films that could bring people to the horror scene. But you might want to start off with something like Hitchcock, though. But anyway, though, yeah, The Funhouse. It's a good little movie. And if you're wanting to check out something from Tobe Hooper that's not going to scare the crap out of you, but still give you a few jumps here and there, this was a good choice. But let's go ahead and get into it. The story kicks off with a character named Amy who lives in this Iowa town with her mother and father and her little brother Joey. And on this particular night, Amy's going to be going on a date with a guy named Buzz, whom she met at school. And Amy and Buzz are actually going to be going on a double date with their friends Liz and Richie. And they'll be on this double date at a carnival. And so the carnival's in town, and a lot of people are going to check it out. But Amy's parents are kind of iffy about it. Amy's mother, she's not so enthusiastic about Amy going out with a guy who's just a gas station worker. Never mind that he's just a high school student. And Amy's father is concerned because there was a carnival that came into a town that was nearby, and some girls had been murdered there. And so because of that, Amy's father's like not so enthusiastic about Amy, going on this date at this, carnival that's coming into town. But basically, Amy, agrees to, she, after introducing her parents to Buzz, basically they agree to have it, be home by a certain time. And, Amy's parents kind of back off and they're like, okay, all right. So Amy and Buzz meet up with Liz and Richie, and they drive to the carnival, and they get a little stoned. They're smoking some pot, but they go there and they have a good time. They get on some of the rides, play some of the games, even see a peep show, and a freak show. But one thing that Amy doesn't know is that her little brother Joey had snuck out of the house to follow her, and eventually he finds his way to the carnival after a spooky experience. Walking alone at night, he makes his way to the carnival and tries to find her because he's not wanting to be left out of things. But in the meantime, though, Amy, Buzz, Liz, and Richie, they go to see this fortune teller named, let's see, give me a sec, Madame Zena, who reads Amy's fortune, and she basically says she's got an interesting lifeline, yada yada yada, and that someone, a tall dark stranger will enter her life and change it. And so, her friends who are stoned are, cracking up, and this pisses off the fortune teller. And, she basically breaks character and tells them to get the hell out of her tent. And so they leave the tent, and, they check some of the other things out. And eventually, though, Richie has the bright idea for the four of them to stay overnight at the carnival, because there's this ride, this dark ride called the Funhouse. It's like this big spook house that you're on this set of, set of cars that goes through and shows you a bunch of scary things, like props and what have you. But they get the bright idea to stay overnight at the carnival, because it'd be something spooky and fun, right? And so basically Liz and Amy both tell each other's parents that they're staying at, like Amy's telling her parents that she's staying at Liz's place, and Liz is telling her parents that she's staying at Amy's place. They're on payphones and what have you. So with that being done, the four of them, they head to the Funhouse, and they get on the ride, and at a certain point they get off the ride, but while they're still in the house, and they get into the attic of the place to hide out. And so that as the carnival starts to shut down, the four of them, they're sort of goofing up in the attic, getting high, and the couples are making out. So basically, just having a nice mischievous time. But then they see something down below them, because there's these cracks in the floor that they're able to look through, and they see that fortune teller that they were with earlier, enter, and she's with this carny who's this giant of a guy who's wearing this Frankenstein mask and sort of lurching around. And basically they witness this Frankenstein looking dude give the fortune teller, Madame Zena, some money, and they come to realize that basically Madame Zena is taking money for sex, and so she proceeds to get this Frankenstein looking carny off, but unfortunately this guy can't really control himself, and so let's just say things happen prematurely. And so he gets pissed off, and he's motioning for her to give the money back, and she's like, a bargain's a bargain, and it's not my fault that you can't control yourself. And so this pisses him off, and he throttles her and chokes her to death. And so the four teenagers see all this from up above, and they're just like, oh shit, because here they are, just wanting to goof off and stay at the carnival overnight, but here they are just witnessing a murder. And so the Frankenstein looking carny leaves, and the four teenagers, they leave the attic and try and leave the room, but they have to go through the room, which was right below them, in order to find the exit. But unfortunately, the exit's locked from the outside, and so they're trying to find a way out when they hear people approaching, and so they head back to the attic, and the door opens up to the room, and that Frankenstein-looking carny comes back in, and with him is this older gentleman, this older carny who was, basically, the barker for the Funhouse, that they saw outside earlier. Was saying, who dares to enter the Funhouse, and just trying to get people in there, right? So the Frankenstein carnies, showing him that he's accidentally, killed, Madame Zena, and this, Barker dude is really pissed off at this, and he's pissed off, one, that he's killed someone, and this someone was part of the family, part of the Carnival family, and he's also pissed off at the fact that he gave Madame Zena $100, and he's like, I could have gotten you one of the tent girls for 10, but in the meantime, though, the Frankenstein carnies sort of crying and sobbing and freaking out, and the Barker, when he goes to the box where the money was kept, and it turns out it's actually his box, and this Frankenstein carny is actually his son. But he goes to the box to put the money back that was given to Zena by this Frankenstein dude. But when he opens the box up, he sees that the money's gone, and so he starts freaking out, and starts beating on the Frankenstein carny, demanding to know where the money is. And so the Frankenstein dude's freaking out because, I mean, he didn't take the rest of it. And so as the teenagers are seeing all this from upstairs or from up in the attic, they all look at Richie because they realize that he stole the money while they were down in the room trying to find a way out. And he's all like, I was gonna split it with y'all once we, got out of here. I thought we found the exit. I thought we were gonna go. And this just pisses them all off. And they're like, this is really bad. I mean, it's bad enough that we saw a murder, but the fact that you stole their money. So as if things couldn't get any worse, a couple more things happen as the Barker is chewing his son out, who his son's named Gunther, by the way, it turns out. But Gunther starts beating himself, and he starts hitting himself in the face, and then he literally rips the Frankenstein mask off, and his face is hideous. Like, it literally looks like a monster. Like, you have this weird split, right here to where like his eyes are spread apart and they're red, and he's pale and got this long white hair and sharp teeth, and so he does not look human at all. Like, he's a monster wearing a monster mask. And so the kids upstairs see this and they're like, oh shit, this could not get any worse. But then as Richie's looking through one of the slats, his lighter falls out of his pocket and hits the ground, below them, in the room below them. And so, sure enough, the Barker hears this, and he sees what the sound was, sees the lighter, looks up the slats, puts two and two together. And so he gets the lighter, and he's saying, who's up there? And obviously the kids don't answer. And he's all like, well, you guys realize you're trespassing, right? And basically trying to, get them to come down into the room. But since, they're too terrified to do so, and plus they've literally just witnessed a murder, they're like, no, they're staying up there, right? And so the Barker, he's like, all right, finders keepers, losers weepers. And so he, takes, Gunther into another room to, basically, try and, set things up to keep the kids from getting out. And so the teenagers, basically, they leave the attic and try and find a way out, because now they realize they have to go through the Funhouse in order to find another way out. But they're literally being hunted by two people who know this place like the back and front of their hand, and they also are being hunted by something that's not quite human, and so they are in for a bad night. But so yeah, that's the basic gist of the Funhouse, and I gotta say that this was something that I enjoyed. I think that Tobe Hooper did a good job, and Tobe Hooper and all involved did a good job of having something that had a bit of a slow burn approach, but as we get to the later act in the movie, like to the second third of the movie, when it starts to approach, when things fall off the rails, it's like we can kind of feel something ominous coming. Because, the movie, it starts off with kind of a double homage to Halloween and Psycho, because you have Amy's little brother Joey, dressing up in this, horror mask and, wielding a plastic knife and basically scaring her while she's in the shower, right? And so it's kind of like a shout out to Psycho and Halloween, but also, basically, kind of, starting to remind audiences that, hey, it's all just part of the show. But that kind of you know, serves to, in a way, open up its own, can of worms in terms of, the type of horror that we're about to see, because um, you kind of get the idea that from the brief amount of time we see Amy with her family, you get the idea that there's a bit of dysfunction here, because, you see, for example, you see Joey, basically ogling his naked sister in the shower, and then, Amy, freaking out about that. And then, you see, the way her parents are, just about, I guess, the kids and, being able to go outside the house and what have you. So you get the idea that there's a bit of a dysfunction there. And they even point out in the commentary track that the mother is kind of a low-key alcoholic, because, she's, sort of, lazily sitting in her chair, slamming down, a glass of, whiskey or something, or bourbon or something. And the dad's just sort of, a bit, he's being kind of complacent, I guess, in a way, because he's just sitting there. And so when, Amy and Joey are, running around the house, and Amy's trying to go after Joey, to get back at him, he's just, sort of just ignoring everything. And it's not until Buzz comes to pick Amy up, until that's the only point where her parents really act like parents, But even then, they're sort of jerks about the whole situation, because you got, Amy's mother being snobbish about, Buzz, having a blue collar job, and you have the dad, at least being somewhat protective in the sense that, he has reasons for, being uneasy about, Amy going to a carnival because of the deaths that happened at, or the murders that happened when the carnival was in the last town. And so you have this, glimpse of a dysfunctional family that this dysfunction's touched on. So that kind of goes hand in hand with, some of the depictions of, I guess, American culture at the time that, sort of harkens back to something like Texas Chainsaw, and even moments of Eaten Alive, in a sense that you saw this, portrayal of, the American family that was not all sunshine and roses. But and from there, though, you have these, moments where, when they're at the carnival, even when things aren't outright scary just yet, you have the feeling that it's building to something. You have like the point where, at first it's all fun and games, like, especially when, they're, playing, they're on some of the rides at the carnival, or, they're looking at the peep show from, behind the tent, because one of them cuts a hole into the tent so they could ogle the ladies. But, and of course the girls are, kind of, embarrassed about the whole thing. But so, you have these moments where you see these characters, who really come across as, teenagers having a good time at a carnival. But when they get to the freak show tent and they see, like, these animals that are deformed and what have you, you have a foreshadowing of, say, things not being what they appear to be on first glance. You have this startling moment, for example, where you see one of the characters sees a cow, and they go to pet it, and the cow turns around and it has two heads. And it's not a gag, like, it's actually got two heads. And so and then they find this jar that has this dead baby in it, that's preserved, but it's deformed, like, and its head is, enlarged, and its hands almost look like paws or claws or something. So you have this idea that, they're going to, find something a little more disturbing than the stuff they're seeing at the freak show. But there's also this nice little bit where the actor who plays the Barker, Kevin Conway. There are three Barkers at the carnival. There's the carnival. There's a Barker for the freak show tent, and there's the Barker for the peep show tent, and then there's the Barker of the Funhouse. And they're all different characters, but they're all played by the same actor, by Kevin Conway. And one of the eerie things about him, prior to him being revealed as a villain, as the Funhouse Barker, prior to the Funhouse Barker being, a villain, you have these moments where each one of these Barkers, different characters played by the same guy, they're doing their spiel with the microphone for their respective tents and everything, but they happen to make eye contact with Amy, and it's like it's somehow or another the same person in different bodies almost, looking at her and basically singling her out. And it's I'm not sure if I'm describing it well enough to make sense, but it's a very unsettling effect, because you get the idea that, okay, this is all fun and everything, but now this is starting to get creepy. Like, you start to get the idea that there's something wrong with the carnival. But of course, these moments pass and everything, but you don't quite forget them. And then, of course, the scene with Madame Zena, and at first it's all goofy and everything. Her friends are joking around and getting high and everything. But there's this creepy moment where the crystal ball that Madame Zena is using, it falls off the table and it rolls to Amy, and it stops, and then just on its own rolls over to Madame Zena. And they don't really say if it's straight up supernatural or not, but it's a very eerie effect, because that globe shouldn't have been able to do that by itself. And so that's definitely something that serves to kind of creep out the audience and creep out the main characters. But so I like the fact that there was kind of this build up to the main horror. And when it comes to Joey, the little brother, we already had the glimpse of family dysfunction, like when he's ogling his naked sister, right? But then we see him on this walk through town to the carnival by himself, and he's just a little kid. But you have him be accosted by this guy who offers him a ride, only to pull a gun on him and crack up when Joey runs away in terror. And then, of course, you have a fake out scare of, Joey looking around, and only to be, scared by a dog, charging him, but being, kept back by this gate. And so, the kid, kind of goes through some, horror of his own, in order to get to the carnival. But he, I thought that the actor who played Joey, the little brother, let's see. Yeah, Sean Carson, a very good child actor, child actor at that time. But then when they actually get to the Funhouse and they see the murder and everything, that's when you have a horror movie. Like, you have ominous moments that build up to the horror, and then when the horror hits, it's like, okay, buckle down, this is going to get spooky. And so I like the whole idea. There's like this voyeur aspect where the teens are looking through those slats in the ceiling, and at first they're like, oh man, we can't believe what we're seeing. It's like we're seeing the underside of carny life, in the sense of Madame Zena basically in this and Gunther engaging in this act of prostitution, and so there's like some mischievous humor in that. But then when they see Gunther murder Madame Zena, that's when it's like, oh shit, and things proceed to get worse, because they can't get out, and one of them had the bright idea to steal all the money, thus, showing that there's someone else in the funhouse, or thus demonstrating to, the Barker that there's someone else running around the funhouse, and only proving that when, the lighter falls out. And so, basically, I liked how when the horror hits, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse for the characters. And it's a very nerve-wracking moment when it's like they're seeing all this, and they keep having to go back up to the attic and hide there, only for that not even to be a spot of refuge once Richie's lighter falls out, because when they're being stalked by the Barker and Gunther, and it turns out Gunther is actually his son, and and there's an interesting bit where the Barker is ashamed of his son because of how deformed he is, but at the same time, he does care about his son too, and he's telling Gunther that he needs to help him find these kids, because if he doesn't, then basically they're going to bad things are going to happen to Gunther, because you get the idea that something like this has happened before in other towns, and the Barker even directly acknowledges the two girls that were found murdered were actually victims of Gunther, and even he's kind of shaken by it, remembering all that. But at the same time, it's like, hey, this is his son, and he's as ashamed of him as he is because of how disfigured he is, this is his son, and he's loyal to him. And so basically he gets Gunther to work with him to hunt these kids down. And so I like the idea that you had two depictions of a dysfunctional family. I mean, you have the dysfunction that you briefly see with Amy's family, and then you have the dysfunction that you see with this freak family, or this Carney family. And so it was very fascinating to see in that regard. It's like, which one's more disturbing, right? I think, obviously, the Carney dysfunction's more disturbing, but at the same time, it's like the dysfunction with Amy's family, it's kind of like a glimpse of what's to come as far as this family being messed up in some way. But when the characters are being hunted, it's interesting because with the exception of Amy, who's played by Elizabeth Berridge, they tend to be kind of static characters, but not in a way that's not in a way that has you rooting for their deaths or anything like that. It's like they're static in a sense that there's not a lot of development given to them, but there's just enough to where they come across as, well, teenagers, with their own personalities and what have you. And so even though it's like they're not the deepest of characters, we still get invested in their situation because, it's a situation that, if you found yourself in it, you'd probably, be on edge and terrified too. In a sense that because on one hand, it's like the whole idea of staying overnight at a carnival is something that appealed to a lot of, younger people, I think. And I remember when I was a kid, I was wondering what it would be like to stay at a place like that overnight. And so here, these characters actually get to do that, and it goes wrong in so many ways, so the fact that they got to do that, but they're in this terrifying situation now. That's something that felt very relatable, and so I felt like that's why even though the characters are a little bit underdeveloped, I was still invested. And also just the fact that, Tobe Hooper and his people did a good job of, maintaining the suspense once things got going. Um, and I like the whole idea about things not being what they appear to be. I mean, of course, you have that, with the family, dysfunction that you see, but then, with the freak show, um, and then of course you have that, awesome, and yet terrifying moment when Gunther is beating himself, and then he just rips off the Frankenstein mask, only to reveal something worse underneath. I mean, it's that is a theme that I enjoyed seeing explored in the movie, like, you know appearances being deceiving, and what's really going on underneath the surface and what have you. um, and so I liked how um, like the suspense was maintained, and even when, say, there's a bit of a body count and people do get killed, I liked how there wasn't a huge reliance on blood and gore. Like, there was some blood and gore, but not, say, it wasn't a total bloodbath. Like, there was just enough to be like, okay, yeah, this is a bad situation, and yeah, so and so is definitely dead, that kind of thing. um, but relied more. This was a movie where the suspense was more the focus than, say, the actual blood and gore was. And in Tobe Hooper's hands, it was an approach that worked out rather well. Um, and so, like, the moments of blood and gore we do have, like, they're just enough to, kind of give, the film a little bit of a punch, but not enough to, say, entirely gross the audience out. And so I actually appreciated that, because that kind of goes hand in hand with, Tobe Hooper working with his team to make a horror film that was nonetheless something that wouldn't alienate a mainstream audience. And so, and there was also this nice, moment where Amy's at one point, looking through this. There's this fan that she's looking through, and she's able to see outside of the funhouse. But mind you, this is a point where they're still stuck in the funhouse. They can't get out of there. But she's looking outside, and she sees her family. She sees her mom and dad coming to pick up Joey, because the Carnival people found him wandering around. And so she sees her parents come to pick up Joey and take him home, and she starts, crying and screaming for her dad, and trying to get their attention. But because of the fan that's, that's right in front of her, her voice can't be heard, and she can only watch helplessly as, her family goes driving away. And so I thought that was a rather, intense moment, and in terms of, say, being a relatable moment of horror, I thought that was very well done. And so, yeah, I thought that the way Elizabeth Berridge played her part, like, in terms of, say, being the main character, I thought she did a pretty good job. And I think that her reactions in some of the scenes came across as very believable, like whether it be, breaking down crying, or, freaking out and holding like a makeshift weapon, and trying to, keep an eye out for, Gunther, or who's coming after her or something like that. I mean, I thought she did pretty well. I mean, the other actors, I thought they did well enough in the scenes that they had. But Amy's the one who got the most development. And so, and I liked Kevin Conway, Kevin Conway as the Barker, because, I mean, there's that aforementioned bit where he plays all three Barkers and infuses each one with a different type of personality. But there's that eerie bit where it's like each one makes eye contact, with Amy at one point, and it's like somehow it's the same person, even though it's different people. But Kevin Conway, though, when he plays the Funhouse Barker, um, and you see him for the first time, you're thinking that it's just a spiel he's doing, like something to spook audiences and draw them into the Funhouse. But then when you see that he's in on Gunther having killed people before, that's when you see like him in a more sinister light. But I did like that bit where he's protective of his son, and even and cares about him, but just at the same time it's like he hates him at the same time because of his deformity and everything. But you know um in some of the lingo and dialogue that he has, you kind of get a glimpse into, say, what life must have been like for them in the Carnival circuit. So you have a sense of history there, and I thought that Kevin Conroy did a good job with that. So he's definitely a villain, but at the same time, not just a, say, mindlessly bloodthirsty one. Um, like he doesn't necessarily want to kill these kids, but at the same time, in his mind, he has to kill them, because if he doesn't, if he and Gunther don't kill the kids, then they're going to tell the authorities, and when that happens, well, he doesn't really. It's not so much for himself that he's concerned, but it's more his son, because he knows that his son will be torn apart by terrified crowds and what have you, and so he doesn't want that for him. And so I liked that sort of fleshed out villain that Kevin Conroy played, and for the character of Gunther, he was actually played by a mime named Wayne Doba. And the way Wayne Doba played him, there was like, from what I understand, there were ways of improvisation and what have you, and he brought a lot of physical mannerisms to his part that made Gunther into someone that was terrifying and creepy, but at the same time somewhat sympathetic when you realize that Gunther is a teenager himself, except because of his monstrous development. I mean, he looks like a full-on monster, but he's actually just a teenager who, he's dealing with hormones and stuff like that, and just not a good situation for him to be in. I mean, with his disfigurement and everything. But there are instances though where you can't help but feel sorry for Gunther, especially when you see the abuse that he goes through with his father. But because there's like a scene or two where you see him breaking down, sobbing at one point, and so you do feel sorry for him in that regard. But then again, when he's going after the teenagers, though, to the characters and everything, you're like, okay, yeah, you feel sorry for the guy, but at the same time, you're not wanting him to get his hands on the teenagers, though, just because it's like we've spent enough time with them to be like, okay, they may not be the most fleshed out of characters, but they're likable enough to where you're not rooting for their deaths. And so when Gunther's going after him, you're like, oh crap, this is not good. But yeah, I mean, all in all, though, I mean, I think another thing that helps the horror is the cinematography, and how everything's shot, especially at the Carnival. Because at first, I mean, it all looks inviting and fun and everything, but and when they're first in the Funhouse, I mean, it's spooky fun. But then as things fall off a cliff, or fall off the rails, so to speak, the Funhouse becomes a place of genuine horror, and the cinematography reflects that. Like you see animatronic dolls, coming on and being turned off, and at certain points, and you see the way, from the perspective of some of the characters, like some of the props, look all that more terrifying, because they're being hunted by something or someone in this fun house. And so when they're seeing, these, props and everything, some of them look like they might come to life at any moment to get them. And so really good cinematography in that regard that definitely aided in making things more suspenseful. Yeah, I mean, it was a good movie. I'm gonna go ahead and give the Funhouse 4 out of 5 stars. So as far as special features go, we've got a really good commentary track with Tobe Hooper and a filmmaker named Tim Sullivan, who's apparently worked with Tobe Hooper before on some other stuff as far as commentaries go. But the two of them, they have a good rapport with one another, and you learn a lot about how the movie came to be, like the planning stages and all that stuff. And then you learn about like some of the moments that basically they wanted to either include in the movie, or stuff that but they weren't able to, or some moments that they're really proud of. But yeah, I mean, you basically get the idea that this is a work that Tobe Hooper is satisfied with, and they touch on a lot of things, such as, say, the portrayal of family dysfunction, and also just the whole idea of what's really beneath the surface of things. And so one other thing I neglected to mention was actor William Finley from Phantom of the Paradise shows up as one of the Carnival people. He's a magician named Marco the Magnificent, and it's a cameo appearance, but it's a funny one. And one of the special features, actually, it's an audio interview with him, and he talks a little bit about his working history with Tobe Hooper, because he was in Eaten Alive as well. But when he was in this movie, one of the things he talks about is that he actually learned how to do some magic tricks. So even though he was only going to be in the film for a few minutes, and the focus was going to be on one particular trick, he wanted to basically sell the idea that he was a veteran, Carnival magician. And so he was able to learn how to do some magic tricks just for the sake of getting into character. And so I thought that was actually pretty cool. And you also have an interview with executive producer Mark L. Lester, who was the same guy who directed Class of 1984 and the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Commando, oddly enough. And so he has some good memories of working on the movie and working with Tobe Hooper as well. And I just thought it was funny how the guy who did an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie was a producer for this movie. So and you also have an interview with the composer John Beal, and John Beal comes across as a laid back, nice guy. And he talks about how he's done a lot of scores, since this movie. But he said that, to this day being like whenever this Blu-ray was put out, I think it was like 2015. I think. Don't quote me on that, but at the time of the DVD and Blu-ray were put out, in this interview, he was talking about how to this day, he'll have people come up to him, or people who are in the music industry who will be talking with him, and they're like, "Hey, you're the guy who did Funhouse." And so, even though he's done a lot of stuff since the Funhouse, it's something that a lot of people fondly remember. And he actually does a pretty good score in the movie, and it's just the right balance of, fun and inviting, and then ominous and spooky, and then straight up terrifying. The worse the situation gets for the characters, and so it's definitely a score that he's proud of, and he was very oftentimes very touched that people still remember his work on the movie, and so and you also have a theatrical trailer, some TV spots, and you have a couple of deleted scenes that were put in for the television release, or the TV cut of the movie, just to kind of increase the runtime. And they don't really add a whole lot to the movie, but I mean, there's a little bit of character development for Amy's date, Buzz. And so, I mean, it's a little interesting in that regard, but they don't really add a whole lot to the movie. Um, but yeah, I mean, the movie, like, it clocks in at 96 minutes, and so it's just long enough to, I mean, it's to where it's like you actually have a good story and everything, but it doesn't plot along. It doesn't wear out its welcome. And that was one of the things that they touched on in the commentary. They liked how, things flowed at a good pace, and they're proud of how it all came out. But yeah, so that was the Funhouse. 4 out of 5 stars. And so if you made it this far, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And you got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Have a good day. Bye.